When the Oracle of Omaha speaks, people listen. So it was no surprise that Warren Buffett's ominous comments about the future of newspapers got a lot of attention this week. When they said stop the presses for the Malden Evening News and the Medford Daily Mercury last month, it had nothing to do with breaking news. After more than 130 years in business, they became the latest casualties in the newspaper business.
There's 1,300 daily papers left in the United States. There were 1,700 or 1,800 not that many years ago.
Warren Buffett, one of the nation's most successful financiers, has investments in 31 papers. But he's now sounding more like a bear than a bull.
There are only 2 papers in the United States that I think have an assured future because they have a successful internet model to go with their print model, and that's the Journal and the New York Times.
Building a healthy revenue stream with online subscriptions and advertising has turned into an elusive holy grail. Buffett thinks the Washington Post, now owned by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, might also have a chance.
He's improved dramatically their situation online, and so it's conceivable that their math works.
The Boston Globe is about to leave its longtime home on Morrissey Boulevard for smaller digs downtown. Editor Brian McGrory says people need to understand news costs money.
More and more, we need online readers to support our journalism. We are increasingly betting on the support of our readers.
Those could be long odds with so many people content with what they can get for free. All right, I'm going to put this to you, Josh. Is he right? Those are the only 2 newspapers? And does he mean they're going to survive only online, or they'll survive as both a print and an online?
Well, what he actually said was that those are the only papers that he thought were assured of a future.
Yeah.
And I think that's better than saying that they're the only ones with the future, right? I do think that the people in my line of work talking about analyzing media often talk about the New York Times and think of that as a model for everything else. The New York Times is in a fundamentally different business than the Boston Globe, than the Hartford Courant, than the Metro West Daily News. It's a very different game because they have this incredible market of educated, well-off Americans and people around the world who read and speak English. That is a great growth opportunity, and they are top of the line. The Journal has had a pretty rough stretch of late, but I think that there are a variety of reasons why there's faith in that model. I do think it's interesting, though, when Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway bought a number of newspapers a few years ago, there were a lot of people who thought, oh, look, this billionaire is buying these papers. He's a brilliant investor. They must be a good business. But I really think it was obvious at the time, it's even more so now, that he was one in a long line of investors who've seen an asset that still throws off cash flow that you can just milk on the way down. And that's what's happening to his newspapers. None of the newspapers he owns have done anything innovative. They haven't done anything innovative in digital or in print. He's just seeing that they still turn off profits, throw out profits every year. They can cut costs 8%, 10% every year, and just ride it into the ground.
Yeah, Warren Buffett has said this before. I guess the great thing about being Warren Buffett is you can say it once a year and people pay attention to it. Of course, he's identified the 3 papers that are national and therefore able to attract an enormous national audience and convert some small percentage of that audience into paid subscribers. The problem facing the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and on and on and on, is that they're regional. And the regional space is the worst place to be in at the moment. On the other hand, we're still in the very early years of figuring out if people will pay for digital subscriptions. The Globe has had some success with this. Some of it they can thank President Trump for. They just recently jumped from 75,000 paid digital subscriptions to 80,000 within a matter of weeks, again, because of the Trump effect. If there's a large enough audience that's willing to pay to offset the fact that digital advertising has proven to be largely a bust for newspapers, then there may be a space for regional papers. But if there aren't enough paying customers, then Warren Buffett is right. They're not going to last.
And I'm still thinking that in some communities, certainly not the ones that he mentions because they are national, as you've said, these small, very linked to the community papers can survive. Of course, he's talking about newspapers big enough to have an investment petition.
Like the Medford and
exactly.
Malden.
So there is that too, so that you kind of can work on parallel tracks a little bit, as long as those community newspapers really are still connecting. You know that better than me. So it's interesting. I just thought it was weird that he didn't have much faith in the Washington Post, and now he's saying maybe, because you think of Jeff Bezos and you think, well, if he doesn't know how to, make the digital right, well, who does,
I would totally agree with that. I thought that was the oddest part of this.
Yeah.
I think the Washington Post, of those 3 papers, is actually doing the most innovative, most interesting work in terms of, having a really strong product team that's making sure the customer experience is good, and they've been doing amazing journalism. I mean, it just seemed odd that didn't fit into his top 3. I think the other thing that's sort of missing in the conversation is that it's possible that newspapers, the physical newspaper, isn't going to survive for that much longer. But the demand for local news, and I think the willingness to pay for it, is going to continue on some level and in some form. So it's sort of a question of, does it matter? I mean, I get the nostalgia for newspapers, and I love them too, and I want to open one up every morning. But I don't know if it matters if newspapers survive as much as local news operations, and I think they will survive.
But I just think there's the chances of there being local newsrooms that are anything on the scale of great American newspapers of 20 years ago. In most communities, the vast majority is very, very slim. I wish that were not the case. I've spent the last 8 years at my job trying to figure out ways that would not be the case, but the reality is there's going to be broadcasters. Public radio will still exist in markets. There will be small digital startups, but I haven't seen anything to indicate that there's going to be anything that replaces if the Boston Globe went away tomorrow, which it's not going to.
But if they're the ones who cover the news. They're the ones who break the news. Right. I mean, it still remains, even though radio and television has thrived and survived, it's still the newspapers that pick up 95% of the real news.
Everyone at home, go subscribe to 3 newspapers.
And Susie, I agree with you. I thought Warren Buffett's grudging admission that maybe the Washington Post will make it was very odd. Yeah. The Post claims that they've achieved profitability, although they don't share any numbers. No. Yeah. And then the other thing is they have, not surprisingly, leveraged it with Amazon in some very interesting ways that nobody else can do.